So back in Gemara Rosh Hashana Chavav Amud Aleph.
Oh no!
So
it wasn't that. Sorry.
So what is the? So let's just review real quickly, okay? The last argument, okay? And this is very basic stuff, no philosophy here. All right, what's the last machlokas in the Gemara? So it says like this. It says the Gemara says why do Rabbanan hold? So what's the last argument in the Gemara? So the Gemara says is this. The Gemara says why? Just factually, okay? Factually. So Rabbanan say you can't use a cow horn for your shofar. You cannot use a horn from a cow for your shofar. All right. Rav Yossi says you can. So the Gemara has one other shot at trying to explain why Rabbanan say you cannot use a horn of a cow. So reading the Gemara says Abai Amar Hainu Tamei Rabbanan. All right. Shofar Amar Rachmana V'lo Shnayim V'lo Shlosha Shofros. So when the Torah says, what does the Torah say? The Torah says, Vavarta shofar, right? How many shofars is that referring to? One. The Torah says one shofar. One. Can you use 2 or 3 shofars? No. Okay? So therefore what? So he says, V'ha para kaven dekai gildi. But since the par, how does the cow horn grow? So Rashi explains, it grows, it has an original horn, and then one grows over it, and then one grows over that horn. So if you pluck that horn off, what would you say? What would you have, so to speak? What?
Layers.
So he said horn inside a horn inside a horn, right? So he says mechzi, okay? It appears to be kishnayim social shofars. It's like having 2 or 3 shofars. It's not actually having 2 shofars that you're blowing in, but it's as close as possible to 2 or 3 shofars. Okay, that is Rabbanan. What does Rav Yossi say? Rav Yossi says it's true. He can't deny that reality. He has to agree it appears to be 2 or 3 shofars. But he says Rav Yossi Amalach deka'amr shofar echad amar Rachmana v'lo shnayim shlosh shofars. When God said only one, kevan de mechabre ahadadi chadhu, because it is attached together, it's considered one. Because remember, if you cut the horn off, they wouldn't be loose shofars inside, they'd all be attached one to the other. So this is attached one to the other, therefore it's considered like one shofar. What's the machlokas? But now I'm saying like this. I agree. If you're going to say it goes by the potential, okay, so then what point in time are you evaluating the shofar? Evaluating the shofar.
Point where you take it off.
Right, now. In other words, you're evaluating the shofar the moment, in other words, it's the time you evaluate the shofar as a shofar that defines what it is. So you're right, since it could be 2 or 3, but when could it be 2 or 3?
When you take it off.
Exactly. Today. The day that I take it off, that's a day it can become 2 or 3. So what's the other side going to say to that? Is that clear? Do you understand that? Good.
The second you take it.
But one second, isn't it clear now?
Yeah.
Okay. So the other side's going to say, no, it doesn't go by what it's like now. What does mechabre adadi mean? It means derech.
In high school, he would get.
So what's the machlokas? The machlokas is very beautiful. The machlokas is, do we go based on derech gedilah son, which means how it grows? So since naturally it's true it grows one over the other, but in the way it grows, it's always one entity. Or do you go by what is like now? Meaning once I was going to say dissect. Does that make sense there? Once I cut, it does, right? Once I dissect the horn off of it, right? Now, as you're saying, now it could you're not really dismantling. Now it has that idea of shnayim shlosha attached to it.
The thing is when you take something apart,
Starting the Ritva on Chavav Amud Aleph, what does Ritva first say? He says, repeating the Gemara. What's the main idea though? That the animal Karen, if it's only a Karen, that's bad. It has to be Karen plus shofar. So the original approach we had was that all animals, right? Meaning it's like Karen's like a biological idea. As long as the animal has a horn is called a Karen, but it also has to be called shofar as well, because shofar is the abstract halachic shame that goes into to make it into the kosher thing. No problems with that. Okay, no problems, except for this Venera,
degrees.
Which means what?
I have no idea.
So garua means bad. Very good. I know it didn't sound right, but very good. That's bad. All right. Venera, meaning that this logic appears to be lousy. Okay. Why? Okay, so you gotta. It sounds so much like semantics, but it's actually this is a great ritva for logics. Okay, if you like logics and categories, you'll love this. He's saying that when it says it's not because it's not called a shofar. Rather, it's because it's called a karen. Okay, so 1 second, you got to be clear about this.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Says aval shopara karen ikri shofar lo ikri. So it's the par is called a karen, but it's not called a shofar. So he's saying the problem with the par is not because it's not called a shofar, but rather because it's called a karen. Okay, in other words, you have two logical possibilities. Is the problem with the horn of a cow? Is it because it's not called a shofar, or is it what? Or is it because it's called a karen?
Or is it
First move. His first move is a beautiful move. No one asked this before. Okay, which is okay. Question is, what if you have an animal that's not called a karen or a shofar, but it has a horn?
okay.
What's the status of that?
Wait, it's not called either?
Either. See, we want to posit that. What did he mean by karen? He meant that karen is the biological name for horns,
Right.
but shofar is the abstract halachic definition. So it comes along par, it only has karen, but not shofar, meaning it has a horn. He's saying that can't be. That svara is the wrong svara. Why? Because what do you do with an animal in Tanakh that has horns that's referred to neither as shofar or as karen?
Is there such a case?
Duh.
Karen Yao. Okay, Yao. Shetakian bo lo eshkechan da'akri shofar v'hu kesher.
Oh, so you have the horn of the Yael, okay? The horn of the Yael, right? What's the Yael again? Ibex, okay? That you're allowed to use on Rosh Hashana for a shofar, right? Lo ashkechan ikri shofar v'hu kasher. It's never referred to as a shofar. Mishum, one second, keep going, Mishum,
Mishum d'la'akri Karen.
because it's not called a karen. So 1 second. So you have a Yael. A Yael is not called a karen, nor is it called a shofar. And yet,
It's kosher.
perfectly good to use on Rosh Hashanah. So Ritva is saying, don't tell me that the problem with the cow is that it's not called a shofar. Okay, why? Because you have animals that are called neither karen or shofar, and they're good. So what must the problem be? It's called karen. So what does he hold? What's the problem? Give me just what does he hold? The problem with the par is then. What is the problem with the par?
Well, Karen.
What meaning what? What's karen then? What's karen and what's shofar according to Ritva at this point?
They're two different things.
Great. What do you mean by that?
Oh,
They are two different things.
Before it was that shofar is an added element of Karen that makes it kosher.
No, they're just
Now it's not true.
equal categories.
What do you mean? What do you mean that they're equal categories?
Exactly one.
Before
What?
one was stacked on
Maybe
top of
either
the
or.
other.
I guess.
But here's the problem. The problem is that we do have a reality that animals have horns and karens usually refer to horn. So
Karen could also be in an abstract category.
okay, good. So that's a start. Okay, but you got to be careful. Okay, 1 second. Just tell me if this gets confusing. I apologize. But you got to be careful saying that. Why can't you commit to that? Because the original way of learning the Mishnah was that shofar is one abstract category and karen's the other abstract category. So it can't be that here.
No,
you can't say that
wasn't
here.
what the shofar said. That's what we said before.
Yeah, it was the way we said it.
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
Also,
This is like one of the greatest representations.
Does also for me
No,
it's
put that
not
tape.
absolutely puzzle.
No, just let me just repeat that one time, and then I'll answer your question. I was like this. In other words, the Ritva is taking our original way of learning the Mishnah and just isolating one point. He's saying that Karen, if it's called Karen, what does it mean? It's puzzle.
Yeah.
But that means at this point there is no halachic idea of shofar. There's no when I say shofar, I don't mean a horn. We don't know what we mean at this point because a yael is not called a shofar, and it's also not a karen. But because it doesn't have the psul karen, it could be used as a shofar. So you don't need I know you keep using the word karen shofar, so it may throw people off. But you don't require the actual designation of shofar to make this into a shofar. It just can't be a karen. It cannot. So karen is a psul. Okay, karen's a psul. Is that clear?
Yeah, but then how? And he might deal with this right now.
Okay, so what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says every shofar is kosher except for
Para.
par. What should the Mishnah have said?
You should have said chutz mishal shor.
Sure. Why?
Yeah. Kedi isa b'krua deyelach minu.
Because okay, you guys remember, where does he learn out?
Oh,
where did Rabbanan learn out?
it says
Bechor Shoro. So why did the Mishnah say Bechor Shor? Now, I remember I lied to you guys before, and I said,
Oh.
no, I didn't lie.
Worse than missing things.
No. I didn't though. The Gemara treats shor and par as synonymous. But what the Ritva is telling you is not so fast. Tosos asks, why didn't you use shor as your case in the Mishnah? Okay, why didn't you?
Right.
Why'd you use par? If you're using bechor shoro, wouldn't have been more precise to use shor. So v'tir to him,
Sorry, why is it more precise to use short? Can I ask this
because the
question?
pasuk says bechor shoro. So if you're going to use an example in the Mishnah, why not use the example of that which you used as your proof?
I mean, what's the proof of short? I don't get it.
Because we say, how do you know you can't use the cow horn, right? Because the pasuk says bechor shoro, which means bull, but we're going to say kind of means cow because they learned to mean cow. It's synonymous. Karnir and karnov has a karen, which means it's puzzle. So Tosa says, why did the Mishnah say to begin with, kol ha shofros kasher chutzmi shor? I mean shor.
It didn't say short.
No.
It said short.
Havamina, good. Havamina.
Havamina. Daku shor, Dakri. Okay, Daku shor, Dakri Karen.
Oh, so if it only said shor in the Mishnah, what would you think?
It's only shor.
All kol hashofros kasher, except for only the horn of a shor. Okay.
So para delo Karen. Lo.
Oh, because the par is never actually called the Karen. Little chink in the armor. In other words, okay. So this is we can define this also. All right. So what's he saying? He's saying this. He's saying slow down. He's saying that. Why didn't the Mishnah use shor? Why didn't the Mishnah use shor? All right. We see that it uses the raya as before shoro. That's also his question. Why didn't the Mishnah use shor? Very simple answer. Is it the Mishnah just said shor? So now you have the Mishnah saying kol shofros are kasher except for shor, and the raya is before shoro. So what would you think? Only now. But what's called the karen? What's called the karen? The shor. Is a par ever called the karen? No. So therefore, to teach you that it includes the par, that's why it includes in the Mishnah. Okay. What's the havmina? All right. So the question like this. The question is that Tosos asks the question. The Ritva brings on Tosos. Why didn't the Mishnah say kol shofros ksherin chutzmi
Short.
shor? Why would Tosos ask that question? Because the proof that they use to show that you can't use the horn of a cow comes from what pasuk? Bechor shoro, from the shore, right? So it wouldn't have been more precise to that which you use as the proof to use as the original language in the Mishnah? That's precision.
Isn't that the same thing? Are you saying why by the actual vav?
No, why? No, why did the Mishnah say? Why did the Mishnah? But the Mishnah doesn't say shore. The Mishnah says par. Why didn't it say shore? Should have said shore in the Mishnah. Bull, not cow.
Where's par and where's shore?
Par Mishnah, shore Gemara. Proof. Pasuk. Okay. Yeah.
Well, the pasuk in the Gemara is
Also saying, if the Mishnah would have said shore, and not par, so what would you think? Only the horn of a bull is a problem to use. Right? That's what you would think. So Kamash Malan, it uses par because the Gemara says before shoro. So now you have shore in the Mishnah, proof from shore, conclusion, only shore. All right? So that's why you should be seeing right now this tremendous circle being drawn by Tosfos. But
It teaches you a category.
okay, now we're talking. So obviously that's going to be the direction you have to go in. Okay. The Havmin is like this, but I'm going to show you. Just take one little twist. But you're right. Essentially, you're right. The Havmin is saying this. The Havmin is saying is that how would you have classified it? What would be the normal way to classify such a thing? You take each individual animal, right? You take a shor, you take a par, you take Yael, you take blah 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 blah, and then each one gets evaluated in and of itself and to determine whether or not it can be used on whether. The research in the Torah, where it's called Karen, the point is you're finding out which one's possible and which one's not. All right. What is it telling us by? You're right insofar as creating the category. The Maskana is saying is that no, we're looking for a category, but what's the first standard here? What's the first classification being used? No, that's what it's called. What's the classification? Shore, par, I kept saying they're synonymous, but they're not really synonymous because one's male, one's female, but they're part of the same
Karen group.
Genus.
Put that in halachic terms. You're right. Min.
Fine.
Okay.
You gotta say species.
You gotta sound yeshivish. Okay. Min. But you're right. But what's min? Min is you have two particular animals. Min is one category above. All right. So what the Gemara is telling you, what the Ritva is telling you is that why does he use par and shore? Because you're teaching that there's a din of Karen in a specific min. The min. It's a problem in the min. So you wouldn't need a drush for par. Right? You don't need a drush for par. So that's why the Mishnah says par. You understand? You don't need to darshan out par. There's no need for it because shor and par are the same min. It's true they're differentiated based on male female, but they're part of the same
Well,
min
characteristics.
or species. What?
But they have different characteristics.
They do, but they produce children together.
It says.
So therefore, what?
It says
They're part of the same min. Like just like men and women. Men and women, right, have different characteristics, but ultimately they're both humans.
But aren't their horns different or not?
They're different. But the reason why it's a problem is because it's called. We'll get to that soon. All right, we'll get to that soon.
It says par to show that it never had the same par.
The word here counts. So what does he say? He says, the kevan she'ein psulo migufo, the psul of the Karen does not come from what?
The actual physical.
Rather, elamachmas shmo.
Shema.
Okay, ein lecha, you don't have ella
Elamash Nikra, Karen?
Karen.
Right.
Below,
Larabos? What is that?
not to include.
Not good. Dever Achar. Filahu Mina.
Right, even if it was the same min. Okay, lahachiktani para shekola min echad hu. Okay, so what's his point? Now we gave the initial svara, and now he's pushing it further. He's saying that since the psul of Karen is not a psul in the guf, meaning what?
The actual horn.
Right, it's not the horn that's the problem. Ella, it's because of what's the problem?
Shema.
Which means what?
I have no idea.
You do know what it means. No, you do know what that means. No, what does shame here mean though? Forget the min.
No.
What?
It's called bar.
No, it's called.
Okay.
What does Karen mean?
Horn.
Does it?
Okay.
What does it mean?
Reminder.
You do know what it means.
Zikaro.
It's not megufo. The psul of Karen's not a problem in the biological horn. Ella machmas. What's machmas shmo? Right. It's called the Karen.
Right.
In other words, is there such a thing in reality as Karen?
Okay.
If you look at a cow, do you see a Karen? No.
We already knew
You see a
this.
horn? No, we
This
didn't.
was a week ago.
We didn't.
No, we didn't.
We can't.
Dikevan she'ein psulo migufo. So since the psul of Karen is not a psul in what? Migufo. It's not a psul
Biology.
in the horn itself, right? Ella machmas shmo, which means what? Machmas shmo. What it's called, which is the halachic reality.
Okay, yeah.
It's not. There's no. When you see a horn, you're not seeing a Karen. You're seeing a horn, right? Halach has to come along and tell you it's a Karen.
There's a halacha difference between horn, Karen, and shofar.
We haven't said shofar yet.
But
It will be.
but is there a hefsek?
What,
It's not saying anything.
What do you mean a hefsek?
Unless you tell.
Okay, below.
Okay. Below the Rabos Dever Achar. Filahu Mina.
Oh, so you would never assume. There's no reason to assume that would include anything else other than the thing itself. Lahachitani para shekol hamin echadu. So this is what we said before. The svara we said. He just strengthened that point. He's making one more push. What's the push? It's beautiful. So far, forget the machmas gufo thing. We're going to define that. But he's saying one simple thing. If you're telling me that a Karen's really a halachic idea, so then remember that I just said before you have to go by independent classification. What will be your barometer for determining that which is puzzle to use on Rosh Hashana? What has to take place?
Karen.
It has to. You have to say. Somewhere has to say this thing's a Karen. It has to be. The Torah has to say somewhere, or Tanakh, that animal's a Karen. If it doesn't say it's a Karen, right? You can use it on Rosh Hashanah. Okay.
Par.
No, what?
What about a par?
Oh, so the Kamash Malan.
A par is not a
Min.
Karen until it's called a Karen.
You understand? In other words,
Okay.
if the Karen, forget the chiluk between physical and not. If the Karen was a biological idea, who cares what the Torah says or not? It'd be irrelevant. I could just say that's a Karen, because it's a horn. He's saying no. Since the idea of a Karen is just will be quote unquote
Otherwise,
trippy, all right? Right? You need the Torah to come along and say only whatever's a Karen is a problem.
Otherwise, why did they need a ride from the Torah to begin with?
Oh, exactly. But par's not included.
Yeah.
Kamash Malan,
Man.
in the min. That's what the Ritva's first move is. Okay? Just to make sure it's clear. What the Ritva's saying is like this. The Ritva's saying is that we know that Karen, don't ask me why right now, but we know that Karen can't mean the biological horn. Okay? Rather, it means the halachic psul of Karen. Okay? It's a halachic idea. No, just listen to the whole thing. It's a halachic idea. Okay? It's called Karen. It's a new invention by the Torah called Karen. If that's the case, what would you normally require? Like in all other halachic areas, the Torah or Tanakh has to come along and endorse that Karen for that, Karen for that, Karen for that. It would say Karen, but it doesn't say that by a par, right? And yet we know the par is a problem.
It should be.
Just listen. In order to define something as a Karen, let's take like let's take like animals that are kosher, okay? In general. So how do we know which animals are kosher? Torah says so. Torah says these animals are defined as being kosher, okay? And these are not.
It gives names of the
So one
animals,
second.
or just gives a category.
It gives the names of the animals. It does give categories too, but for now, make it easy. It does list animals. These animals are kosher. Similar thing here. Well, the Torah has to come along and say, animal X is Karen, you can't use it. Animal Y is Karen, therefore you can't use it. Animal Z is Karen. But the problem, if that were the case, it never says that by par. It never says that a par is a Karen, yet we know you can't use a par. So therefore, what must you learn? The idea of min. That when it says, it doesn't mean that Karen has to be the identification. Normally in halacha, if Karen is a halakhic idea, which means it's puzzle, it would need to be, you have to have evidence of every single situation, meaning every animal, that would apply to.
And when you say every animal, you mean every gender within a species, correct?
Every gender within a species. Every animal that has a horn.
Not every animal, because I bring you a goat yesterday, I don't have to bring you another goat today.
The species,
I'm
correct.
doctoring, I'm sorry.
Correct. The species. I don't mean the goat that's in front of you right now.
Right,
Okay? When the Torah says Bechor Shoro, it's not saying the shore that God's talking about right now in front of it means shores. Okay? So why does it, that's why it has to use par, the Mishnah, because it's telling you it's the min. That's the min.
That what then? Generally it's the min, or just for pars?
That you wouldn't. It's the only way to get out of the problem of saying why the Torah does not call par Karen, and yet par is a problem. Why? Because par and shore are part of the same min. So you intuitively you wouldn't think that biological differentiation ties them together. And they're different animals. One's a female, one's a male. But the idea they're telling you is that you go one step above that. You go to the min. All right. Okay. Let's just do one more thing. Keep going, Yaakov. Keep one more thing.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll leave this as a question.
Owen.
No, it's the worst.
Hikshu Bahari Show. Okay, Hikshu Bahari Show Oz.
Nope.
Okay.
Oz means.
Oz.
What does Oz mean?
No idea.
Strong.
Strong. Doesn't mean that here. Come on. What's it talking about? Not O's.
A's.
A's. Okay. What about an A's?
What is that?
You know what it is. Horrible.
Okay.
It's also, isn't the technical term a U? Are you sure? Isn't it EWE? It's kasher, that we know. Below. Uh-oh.
Okay.
Now you got a big problem. Huge problem. All right? Dylan, listen to this part. This is critical, okay? We have a huge problem right now. We just established that if anything is called a Karen, it's a problem. Okay, fine. So we said not everything. As long as it's part of the same min, you're cool. All right? So min here would mean sure. Well, not cool. Shore and par, they're part of the same min, but we have a problem. And A's is not called a shofar, but it is called a Karen, and yet you can use the A's on Rosh Hashana. Uh-oh.
Yeah,
So the whole...
Throw out the old Svara.
No.
Oh.
Do we do that?
Or modify it.
That's more like it.
Wait, we
modify.
Apologetics! Sorry.
The Ritva's going to be modifying it. Not me.
Oh.
The Ritva.
Not Div.
You know that Kedich Siv. How does he know it's called a Karen? Because guess what? He has a trusty Tanakh, and it says the Hatsphere.
That's it.
A couple times.
Well, yeah, Karen
Okay.
Chazos bin Eno. Whatever that pasuk is. The point is that somewhere in Nach, it says what? In Daniel. Very good.
You don't even know that's from.
Of course. So one second, you have a problem with the A's because the A's is called what? It's called a Karen. Okay. Oh. So what's his answer for Tirtzu? Oh no, it's also called a shofar.
Right.
Okay. Why? No, but not that the Torah calls it a shofar. The Torah doesn't call it a shofar, but we call it a shofar. Why? Sha'ez. No. Bichlal se the yovel hu. So it's part of the category of se. Okay. And se is used by what? Yovel. So when they learn out shofar by Yovel,
Really?
yeah, se. So you see why you can modify it now.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Stop. Okay, so that's the question. We'll leave off with that question. Yaakov. Sha'ez b'chlal sev yovelhu. Just actually read the line. Dichsiv se ksavim. The se izim. So what do you automatically see? Se is the category, right? Because se ksavim, the se izim. A's kaves fit into se. But then he says uchsiv shofros hayovlim, and they're called what?
Shofars.
Of the yovels.
Yeah.
Of yovlim. Okay.